Word of the showdown spread quickly, and come next afternoon there were at least 25 locals lining the shore of Jacob's Cove by the time the town clock tolled 2 bells. Will, who overnight had reclaimed some of his cocky nature, had arrived early and was waiting impatiently for the arrival of his opponent. As if on cue, the Indian appeared on the beach, walking toward the crowd from the west, arriving minutes later. Without speaking, they both headed into the water, with Big Will in the lead. Will climbed up on his favorite rock in the cove and staked his spot out on the highest point of the sloping rock. The Indian simply stepped up on the rock and turned to face the sea. The moderate swells, punctuated by larger sets, seemed to indicate that this would be a long but interesting contest. I think we all knew what the outcome would be before the contest ever began, but we had to watch anyway. As the tide rose over the next hour or so, some of the shore-bound spectators began shouting encouragement to Will, who stood resolute, leaning into the ever-growing waves. The Indian never budged. Even though he was standing on the lower portion of the rock, from our vantage point he still seemed much taller than Will. To make matters more interesting, the late afternoon winds had begun to kick up out of the southwest and were starting to knock the tops off of the building sea. One way or the other, we knew it would be over soon. The end came swiftly enough as the first wave of a particularly large set crashed onto the rock. Will, much to his credit, withstood the initial brunt, but as the last of the white water rushed over the rock, the struggling Will lost his footing. He fell forward, disappearing from our view for a few moments before the receding water revealed his prone form miraculously clinging to the rock. But this small victory would not be enough. As he struggled to regain his feet, the next wave broke viciously onto the rock, its full weight smashing into the defenseless Will. The impact drove Will's head straight into the rock, knocking him unconscious before unceremoniously sweeping him off the rock and into the swirling backwash. The big Indian never hesitated for a moment. He jumped into the chaos, hands searching the water frantically in an attempt to locate Will before the sea claimed him as her own. On shore, we were not even sure of what had happened until moments later he lifted the still unconscious Will from the seething waters. He made his way swiftly to shore, holding Will high above the water. Upon emerging from the wash, he placed Will on a small sandy patch amid the boulder field. He quickly bent over and listened intently to his breathing as the gathering crowd murmured their concern. After a short period of time, he seemed satisfied at what he had heard and said to no one in particular, "He does not have water in his lungs. This is good. One of you should go call an ambulance." Several of the guys immediately broke off from the crowd and made for the path up the cliffs. It would be a little while before they made it to a phone, and even longer before an ambulance would arrive from over the next town. Shortly after they left, Will began to stir, first with a moan and then sitting up holding his head. The gash on his forehead and scrapes on his face were bleeding profusely, adding to his already ghoulish appearance. After a few moments, he looked up at the guys standing around him, his face a bloody question mark in search of an answer. "What the hell happened?" he demanded. Several versions of his header on the rocks were related to Will, and they all concluded with the Indian saving Will's life and carrying him to shore. Will, still dazed and struggling to wrap himself around the implications of what he had just heard, looked up at the Indian standing quietly off by himself. "You did this? You did what they said?" he asked. The Indian nodded assent and walked over to join our group. He looked down at Will. "Would you have not done the same thing for me?" he asked. He then glanced over at me, as if remembering me from the previous day at Jim's, before looking back down at Will. Will offered no answer to the question, but met the Indian's gaze as he spoke in the same soft, even voice some of us had heard the day before. "If you had won this contest, you would have claimed ownership of these rocks and forbidden my use of them. Is this not true?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued, But this has not come to pass. He then looked up, addressing us all. As victor of this contest, I ask only that you hear me now and understand my meaning. I know you are angered at my presence, and I mean no offense to your livelihood. Anger of this kind always leads to conflict, and no good ever comes of it. This I know. He paused for a moment before continuing. A man almost died today, this for the illusion that he might win possession of some rocks. Your own history, it is filled with evil acts, a result of your never-ending thirst for possession. Yet you still do not understand, he said, shaking his head. Possession is like a rope made of smoke and mist. It binds only in appearance, but offers no substance, and is gone with the first breeze. He gestured toward our surroundings. No man may claim ownership of a rock, as the creator of these things does not permit dominion of this kind. He looked back down at Will. As I cannot rightly claim ownership of these rocks, you may fish here whenever the sea accords you the privilege. I wish no further conflict, so I will fish these rocks no more. With that, he walked past us and headed back down the beach in the direction he had come.